The MLB trade deadline is officially over, but it isn't in your fantasy league. For this week's buy low, we're going to talk about a couple of sluggers you could get on a discount and a lot of Tampa connections. But first, let's talk about a star player who did not get traded, much to the chagrin of his current owners. That's Luis Robert Jr. of the Chicago White Sox. Now, the White Sox did not part with either Crochet or Robert because, well, I guess they just wanted too much, or maybe Chris Getz doesn't know what he's doing. You can spin it however you want, but bottom line is their best pitcher and their best offensive player are still on the roster for the rest of this ugly season. Now, we can't pretend this is a good thing for Robert Jr. Instead of being on a contender, an offense that scores runs. Sometimes he's on the White Sox still. But it's not the end of the world, and it's not like he won't do anything the rest of the season. The guy, as long as he's healthy and out there, is still a threat to hit home runs, steal bases, and he actually should be boosting his average from what it is. Right now, he's posting a career high strikeout rate, about 36%. That's not really him. That's not his thing. So I feel like that's going to improve. And besides just the fact that he's still in Chicago, it's also the fact he's been really bad since the All Star break. In fact, he was hitting just 103 with only a solo home run in the last 2 weeks until he finally kind of snapped out of it. The last two games, he's collected 4 hits. But still, last 2 weeks overall, he's only hitting 163. It's safe to say that his value is pretty low right now. The batting average is terrible. He's still on a terrible team and he's been in a slump. So, this is a time to try to take advantage. If you need a boost, a guy who can help you in both home runs and steals. And again, I can't say the batting average is going to be great, but it's probably going to get at least a little bit better. All right, now let's talk about a guy who got traded to Chicago. That would be the Cubs. Here's that first Tampa connection I mentioned. It's Isaac Paredes. Now, I'm going to take a very atypical approach for me. I'm not going to go in with stats in analytics because that's usually the way you got to look at things in baseball, right? The whole Moneyball approach. With Paredes, it's just a little bit different for me. See, if you look at the fact he went from the Rays to the Cubs, I mean, it's weird because this whole trade was actually kind of weird. They swapped Paredes and Morel. They're both kind of slugging types who can play third, although, that's kind of generous to say that Chris Morel plays third base. He's really just going to be a DH, thankfully, from now on. He should be. He can play a little bit here and there, but still. Paredes not really a best defender either. Right? He's a guy who can move around in the corners, but these are kind of similar players, and both teams are kind of selling, but not really. And both teams are really not contenders. It's weird because the Rays actually have a better record than the Cubs, but you feel like the Cubs added pieces here at the deadline and the Rays had a fire sale. So it's weird that this trade happened because I don't know that there's a winner or a loser. And Paredes on paper didn't really win or lose either. He didn't really improve as far as team context goes, talking about that record. And as far as park factors, even for a right handed hitter, Wrigley Field really isn't much better than the Trop. And then you look at Paredes lately, he's been ice cold after he was super hot to start the year, the first 2 months. I mean, this guy was an all star. But lately, he's gone three for his last 34, only one home run. So why would we want to buy into him now? Well, the answer to that question is just I have a feeling he's going to get better. I just feel like even though the Cubs aren't really any less disappointing than the Rays have been this season, I mean, their offense has been slightly better. I just feel like it's a better offense. I mean, the Rays, this whole season has felt like a big disappointment for them from the beginning. And you just kind of feel like that whole team has been trending downwards. And you've seen so many of their players start to slump as the deadline approached. And Paredes, the guy who was most of all rumored to be traded and did get traded, I feel like he's got to have been affected by it. Not like the Cubs is this great winning atmosphere these days, but they have so much talent, that offense. I figure it's got to click at some point, right? They're getting Cody Bellinger back from IL. Guys like Swanson and Horner have got to start hitting a little bit. Guys like Hap, he's starting to gradually pick it up. So I think this might be at least a good change of scenery for Paredes. For a guy who still does have legit power and can definitely help you in those powder categories, I think this is a good time to buy him on the cheap. All right, now another former Ray who is now in Baltimore. That is Zach Eflin. Now, you also think for a pitcher moving out of Tampa Bay, not necessarily good because Tampa usually does magnificent things with veteran pitchers, and that dome is very much pitcher friendly. But in this case, again, it's team context. You can't tell me that a guy going from a team that has been a clear seller for weeks now, a team that seems like they're declaring themselves a non contender, going to the best team in the AL East and a strong World Series contender who just added so many pieces in Baltimore. That's got to help a guy. And then obviously, this is going to help his potential to get some wins too. Eflin has been solid this year, but definitely not what we were hoping for before the year started. 4.11 ERA, 1.19 whip. I will be honest and admit, I threw his name out early in the preseason as potential dark horse for the AL Cy Young Award. That didn't happen, right? He somehow regressed negatively this year, but it feels like that happened with all the Rays. Now, I'm not saying Eflin's going to go out and dominate just because he's an Oriole now, but I think this helps him, gives him a boost, and it's a player that's going to start to get a little bit more attention because he's in Baltimore, but I still feel like his value in fantasy isn't that high. All right, now maybe this one's too obvious, but maybe some of your league mates, at least whoever has Jorge Soler, hasn't been paying attention. He's an obvious buy now candidate while you can. Yes, he just got traded to Atlanta again. We'll get to that in a second, but also, whoever's got Soler, hopefully, did notice that lately he's been on fire. He was moved up to the leadoff spot for the Giants because he just continues to rake since the All Star break. In the second half, he's hitting 359 so far with a pair of home runs, four multi hit games just in the past week. In fact, he's had three separate three hit games. And now moving from San Francisco to Atlanta, talk about a change in park factor. Here's one that's definitely noteworthy. Look, Atlanta is up there over the past 3 years, a rolling window for right handed hitters. The home run park factor for Atlanta's Truist Park is number 7. And the flip side, you already know, Oracle, San Francisco is one of the very worst. It's 5th lowest. And let's be real, it's actually 4th lowest because London Stadium shouldn't count when they only play one series there a year. Now, we remember, as the Braves clearly do, Soler's time with them was pretty successful. Back in 2021, he was also flipped to them midseason and only wound up hitting 14 home runs, 33 RBIs, 269 average in the second half, and winning a World Series MVP. I'm willing to bet that doesn't happen again because the Braves are most likely not going to the World Series this year. So they needed something. I mean, Soler isn't really like a boost to a contender so much as he's like a big band aid they're trying to slap on that lineup with so many injuries and guys out. But because of that, Soler should be hitting leadoff in a still decent now Atlanta lineup. I'm not going to go and pretend last week I didn't say this Braves offense was nothing like it was last year. Of course it isn't, but it's still respectable, again, compared to some teams we've talked about, like the Rays and the White Sox. Now, whoever's got Soler on their roster may not view him as a sell low candidate. Maybe they think they're selling high at this point. You could still probably swing a deal for him and come out ahead. So I would only say buy if it is truly a buy low. Then whoever's got Giancarlo Stanton, well, we know what they are thinking because it's what we all think about Stanton is it's not a guy who is injury prone. It's just a guy who is injured constantly. And this is a fact now. We can't just say that it's an unfair label. He's literally injured all the time. He just came off the IL again with a hamstring injury. And maybe you don't want to deal with that headache. If so, that's fine. Let's just move on and skip this. But I will say with Stanton, there's so much upside. It might be worth it, especially if you're looking for power. Like, this is a guy who's going to be still hitting either 5th or 6th in that dangerous Yankees lineup that just added Jazz Chisholm. And so, yeah, whoever's in that spot, you know that's a good place to drive and runs. Giancarlo Stanton's still showing that power. Before he hit the IL and missed all those weeks with the injury, this latest injury, look, he had 18 home runs, 45 RBIs, and 269 at bats. He was up there among the leaders in home runs until the recent injury. Like, I know it's just a matter of hoping and praying he stays out there. I mean, that's to say on the field. He's got DHs. He doesn't have to field, right? I think he could do it. I think it's worth it as long as you're not giving up too much to get him. Look, this guy, even though he's older and apparently made of glass, he still has the best bat speed in the bigs. In fact, all of his StatCast stats point to a guy who still hits the ball harder than pretty much anybody else. So, okay, we just need him to make it through just a few more weeks. And then let's go back to Tampa. Guy who's still on the roster there, and I think might be worth grabbing low. In fact, possible he's on the waiver wire because some people dropped Shane Baz after a couple of rough starts. That's way too early to give up on such a talented player that we were so excited to see come back. And just like that, all of a sudden, he's old news. Well, his last outing was much better against Cincinnati. In 6 innings, only gave up 2 runs on 2 hits and had a season high 7 strikeouts. Now, he's only had a few starts since coming up from the minors, since missing so much time with injury. It's too soon to really judge what he looks like. I know this last start was better. The 2 starts before that were really bad. Yeah, I see people just ready to cut bait on him. And so if somebody's got him rostered and they want more of a sure thing, I'm buying into Bass. Like, I know Tampa isn't necessarily ready to contend this year, but it's still a good pitcher's park. He's still a talented pitcher. He'll be out there. We've seen what a guy like Taj Bradley has done. Even on non playoff teams, you still can extract a lot of value in fantasy. We can't forget that right before getting called up from AAA in his rehab starts, Shane Baz was lights out for Durham. He had a 1.57 ERA and he had 35 strikeouts and only 10 walks. Now, I will say this with Baz. I don't necessarily want to buy right here, right now, this moment, because his next start actually might open up a bigger window. I don't like the fact he's going on the road to face the Houston Astros. And so, what I'll say is if he doesn't have a great start there, or even if he gets roughed up, that's the time you want to go out and make an offer, because then you can truly buy low or maybe even just pick him up if he gets dropped. Keep working the trade market. That's the way to fantasy glory. Keep adding those parts and those players that are going to help you through the second half. It's almost like another season. And of course, keep working the waiver wire, stashing those prospects that are now going to finally get their chance at the show. If you didn't catch the latest Beat the Breakout, here it is.